3030 in Conversation with Paul Wiegard was recorded live at the 2025 Spada Conference.
Welcome back to this final session for this morning, which is another In Conversation with Paul Wiegard, who those of you who were here yesterday will know is the co-founder and CEO of Madman Entertainment. And to lead that conversation, I'd invite you to just put your hands together and make welcome Dr. David Court as well.
Good mid-morning. Am I going to kick it off here?
Go.
And I think David may have seen this sizzle, but we're going to run a little sizzle that we played at the Australian International Movie Convention a few weeks ago, and just runs 2 minutes, and I'll talk a little bit about what the sizzle is, just to give you a bit more of a sense of, I guess, the Madman business and the films that we seek to represent. Loud.
This is our gift to you.
You need cooling, baby, I'm not fooling. I'm gonna send you back to schooling. Way down inside, all you need. I'm gonna give you my love. I'm gonna give you my love. My love. You know you're quite handsome.
So that's a snapshot of the films. I fucking should know about that line by now. But that's a snapshot of the films I've been working on over the last sort of 12 months, and there's a bunch of films you're not familiar with which are coming up over the next 6 months. I just realised there probably should have been a few more of the Kiwi films. And a bit of an update on that front. I think Pike River's still sitting number 4 at the box office. And love the work that our local team here have been putting into that film. But just the flavour of that sizzle, just wanted to sort of, give you a sense that, the films that we're looking to represent are sort of director-led. They push cinema forward, they're critically acclaimed, they have purpose. They ask the question, is there positive social change? They emotionally engage. We really want, audiences to feel. And it's such a key criteria to the films that we seek to represent. And, hopefully, if you get a sense from what you've just seen there, yes, that looks like a Madman film, and you get a sense of the why we would want to sort of represent it. So just the underlying conceit of a film, we need to really sort of land on and say, yes, we're the right people to try and represent that project, and we know the why it's here and why it exists. I guess the last little comment just in sort of the setup is just love the idea of making the niche sort of mainstream. I guess everything's a niche to a point, just the size of that niche. So very much speaking from the independent film perspective.
Thanks, Paul. So that's why we're here. And if anyone's got any questions. Actually, Paul won't remember this, but we're here because we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of Madman's creation. And I first clocked Paul about 25 years ago when he became the distributor of the animated Loonig, a project I was involved with. And what I clocked at the time was what a remarkable entrepreneur he was. And now, of course, 25 years later or 30 years later, we have this extraordinary body of proof. 35 Oscar-nominated films released by Madman, including films like Parasite, Anatomy of a Fall, The Zone of Interest. EP'd, this is extraordinary, more than 50 films, including Pike River, Tinar, of course, Mountain, High Ground. And along the way has sort of made this extraordinary transition from the world of VHS and DVD to the world of streaming with the launch of DocPlay in 2016. Paul is co-chair of AIDC's on the board of Screen Rights. He's a force in our industry. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity to throw a few questions at him. And I thought I might start with today's news, which is we're going to hear who's bidding for Warner Brothers Discovery today. And I wondered what you think, Paul, about where Hollywood is at. And are we at the beginning of the decline? Are we at, have we passed peak Hollywood? And what do you think that might mean for independent producers?
What a doozy. It's a bit like we thought we were past peak oil, but we still use too much of it, don't we? So it's interesting, right? Like if you look at the history of Hollywood, every one of those major studios have had so many different owners over the journey, and it's just this incredible list. If you just jump onto a Wikipedia page, and it's sort of passed from hand to hand to hand. So I don't know, like we need the studios. The studios provide the infrastructure and scale and investment into exactly that, the infrastructure which supports the independent industry as well. The top 25 feature films would account for about 60% of the box office. Just think about that for a moment. And the top 50 films account for about 80% of the gross box office. So of the other 950 richly films that hit our screens over the course of a year, grappling over the last 20%. So it's an ecosystem. We need the studios to be healthy to a point, but it's all the trades and everything else that sort of sits under those organisations. But it's an interesting point in time. Most of them have connected to streaming platforms, and they're all have turned the corner and all yielding, profits. As to whether they're yielding as much in terms of margins, that's another question. Comcast, Universal is probably the only other one which is probably struggling amongst them, but they all have a path forward there. So I think this is another way. There's always another billionaire entering the marketplace, but on an upside, on the positive in all of that, does it mean more opportunities for local territories and independent filmmaking whilst this is all playing out? It's clear that since 10 years ago there were 50 blockbuster films a year, and in Australian terms that means films grossing sort of more than 10 million at the box office, and now only about 30 odd films a year are being put into the marketplace.
So opportunity. I do note that the Roman Empire took about 250 years to actually decline all the way to a fall. So maybe Hollywood's got a way to go yet. Just out of curiosity, if it did decline and then fall, where do you think would be the new epicenter of filmmaking?
YouTube. Well, it's happening. Like it is a content creator environment to a point. It's interesting here. In this part of the world, we sit there as an English language territory, largely, competing against the UK, the US, and all that cultural imperialism and all of those films that we are up against on a day-to-day basis in terms of finding markets. For that to slowly decline, will we see the rise of other cinema from around the world? I feel like we're already seeing it now. Like in Oz at the moment, it's sort of been going around amongst a number of the trades. The Indian cinema, or cinema from the subcontinent, is outgrossing Australian cinema at the box office in our local market. So that's not Hollywood. So yes, so there's opportunities. I mean, I don't think independent cinema in Australia or New Zealand has ever relied on Hollywood. In fact, if it may mean the return of some of our stars, that may be a positive.
I'll take that. Just thinking now, I mean, at a time when it feels like horizons are closing in, we're looking around and putting your entrepreneurial hat on, which if you ever take it off, where are the opportunities, do you think? Where do you see opportunities?
Like in the genres or types of film or how things are financed?
Just business.
Oh, I think the most interesting producers for mine, because we're at Spada, are those that are across a whole portfolio of activities. You know, it could be even from live events through to just participating in the role of event management, putting on entertainment of one kind or another. So I just think your ability to build your own audiences, collaborate with people from all around the world, it's so much more simpler than what it once was. So it's just, I mean, I think too often we lean back and don't take enough risks, I think, in this part of the world.
Okay, so more risk-taking.
These are tough questions, Dave.
I'll try and get a bit
I
softer.
only talk from an independent, distributor's perspective.
Paul, in the last few years, has been quite an active player in public policy in Australia, and I guess to some extent here too. And of course, we've had the great victory of quotas in Australia applied to streaming platforms. So just now thinking with that public policy perspective, Paul, where do you see is the next area for attention? Where do we need to put our efforts now, do you think?
It's funny, I did a master's under David about 12 years ago, and the provocation at the time was he asked me a couple of questions. He said, you interested in doing any further education? I said, I don't have time. And he said, what do you really care about? And I started talking about a bunch of things which were, I didn't really understand the terminology, public policy, and then I realised I knew nothing. I couldn't really make a sound argument or triangulate arguments in terms of the independent space, public policy, and other institutions. So hence I went off and did this sort of master's. So it's really important in terms of the industry. And I must say I'm not au fait enough with what Spada's key priorities are at the moment. But, there's lots of regulations in Oz at the moment that do need to be bedded down, particularly around the streaming side of it. I'm on the fence, in terms of what we've seen to date, in terms of how the metric, how it's actually going to be calculated and enforced. But, there's so many different areas of public policy that need attention. Our institutions in Oz, they are desperately underfunded. And I think that needs attention. And it's been a long time since they have had attention. And, good public policy is long-term policy, and we haven't had a stable government for a long time, which we now have in Oz. I can't speak to NZ necessarily, but it's a great opportunity now to bed down some more longer term sort of arts policy and screen policy, I think, at large, possibly including annexing the South Island and making it part of Australia. That could be one part of it. But, we speak a lot about sort of trying to attract private investment, and we have these offsets in place in terms of, production expenditure. I love that, clearly nothing like self-interest, but I'd love that to be extended to the print and advertising expenses that we put in to support our local films. So that's a simple idea is we're spending an extra 100. We know that 30% can come back, and it's all obviously it can be acquitted and it's all cash out. But that sort of money is expense. That there's a rebate on that. That could also be used, depending on the performance of the film, as an accelerator to returns to private investment, and it helps within the risk management. from a distributor perspective, but all the stakeholders.
Okay, that's a
It
good
keeps
starter.
really dry if I keep on talking about
No,
public
that's
policy.
good. We'll take that. The DocPlay story, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how that came about and what you've learned about streaming from building that DocPlay service.
Who knows about DocPlay? Okay, getting there. For you guys who know about it, talk to the others. So it turns 10 next year. And actually that came about through, we had Anime Lab at the time, which is like a dedicated platform for anime, and lots of, and it was a juggernaut really. We were able to grow that particular Anime Lab platform to about 350,000 subscribers in Australia. We subsequently sort of sold that to the Sony group, and you now know it as sort of Crunchyroll. But it provided the, I guess, the white label platform on which we could build DocPlay. And the idea about DocPlay was we were really finding it difficult to find a home in a second window for the films and the documentaries that we were representing. We had nowhere else to go. We, at that stage, 10 years ago, we had about 200 films in our library, of which about 25 of them were Oscar nominated or winners. So we had this incredible, I guess, building block to then present. And then from there we said, look, we don't know whether it's going to be just features or docuseries, and whether it can be just sort of library and just be a really fantastic curated content of the very best storytelling that we could find from around the world. That was just the first basic idea. And it was part funded by Screen Australia's Enterprise Fund at that time, which was an initiative to bring about sort of, it was a fund that we then matched. They put in about 400,000, which we also matched to sort of invest into this new sort of concept. And actually, that ended up being the thesis that I put together for your course, David. And then we paid that back, and now here we are, sort of 10 years on almost, and we have about 50,000 subscribers, and 35 to 40% of that is Australian and New Zealand content. So what the learnings? Our audiences want to hear and see and experience local stories, and it's very distinct in terms of a share of local voices in that platform versus any other platform that is out there. It's clear to me also that, for those who are streaming, it's very lean back. People want curation. They have this sort of, decision-making paralysis as to what is next. So the ability for us to help lead them from A to B is just so critical, and we need to put more time into that. We know that sort of variety matters. The one thing about actually streaming platforms as a business, which is really interesting, it's the most forecastable business I've ever been in. I know we know as a group, from month to month, within about 2 or 3% where it's going to land for the following month, and it sort of moves, fortunately, slowly up. But it's interesting. It becomes a very investable product that we're working in. So it's hugely attractive in that front. And one thing we've come to learn is, original programming and exclusive programming is ultimately critical to provide that point of difference in a streaming platform. So it's interesting, right? Just can a niche platform sit in amongst these enormous juggernauts, these incredible tech Goliaths that are out there? It's sort of proving that there is. I think one of the big challenges for DocPlay over the coming years ahead will be whether it ultimately is then bundled with other platforms. One thing which we have done in Oz, we've also put together a linear channel on Foxtel, which is like the equivalent of Sky here. And that's been great for just general awareness. But again, you realise very quickly, people are creatures of habit, and they want to know, they want to be programmed, they want to be told what to see. And in some ways, it's interesting. I've always, on a personal level, been always a lot more curious and put together my own lists and sought what I wanted to see based on what I've read, and I realised actually that's not the majority.
Great.
I could carry on.
I'm sure. One of the emerging themes of this conference is partnership and connection, and I think about the ditch that you and I keep crossing to come here, and I know you've got lots of reasons to be here.
Wife's from Nelson.
So I'm just.
She lives in Australia, but she's in the United States.
So I'm wondering, my question is it time to ditch the ditch? Is there a case for coming still closer than we already are? And I'm aware of the long and checkerboard history of closer relations, but is it time to revisit?
You got to pronounce it correctly. Ditch the Dutch. I think that it's surprising to me how difficult it is. It's more challenging. The co-pros between Australia and New Zealand are more challenging than they probably need to be. We did one a number of years ago for Spookers. I thought, gosh, should be such a simple project, but it wasn't. And at the moment, we are working on Crowded House, which for most Australians will claim that band to be their own, just like Pavlova and everything else. And that was actually more expensive than what personally I anticipated for that to be put together. And it's another quirk is like withholding tax. What the hell are we paying withholding tax between the two territories? Again, that's one for Treasury, if anyone's from Treasury here. But I can only really speak from Madman's perspective. We have a dedicated office here. We have a small team, but highly engaged. With a large team also supporting their activities here in NZ. So to be in both territories, you have to be in both territories. You can't be doing it out of Singapore or somewhere else. So I think there's so much alignment of interests. There's significant cultural differences, and rightfully so. But there's so much that we have in common. And I would say more broadly, when we look at, and Madman looks to represent any local films from this part of the world, we want to achieve results that are at the same level in terms of just revenue in Oz as what is achieved in NZ. And that's been largely the case, from Hunt for the Wilder People to Tina, and we hope to do the same with Pike River.
Okay. Paul, of course, is the founder of Madman, but he's also, this is interesting, he's the refounder of Madman, because there was a point when the business was sold to a company called Fantastic, and that went on for a few years, and then Paul rounded up a posse of investors and bought it back from Fantastic. And my question is, in that period when you had been bought out and could have walked away, was there another path that tempted you, or were you just drawn inexorably back to Madman?
It feels like counselling now. It's a bit like, it's a real challenge is sort of, when you've sold your home and then you think, actually, that's a really nice family home, we might go back and buy it. So you wonder, it's really something that's done. And the reasons why we sold the business in the first instance, yes, it was a large check, but it also, we thought, would liberate us from doing a whole bunch of operational things that we weren't that interested in at the time, from warehousing, accounts and all the rest of it. We were very fortunate. We were kept, when we were part of a public group, we were kept isolated and left to our own devices largely. And we weren't suddenly like a horse put into a really large stable and the culture broken. That wasn't the case at all. In fact, what it did do at the time, and this is 2006, it was the trigger for us opening up an office here in New Zealand. So in fact, although we might be 30 as of start of next year, we'll be 20 years in New Zealand as of in a couple of months' time. So in bringing back, again, it's an age thing. A lot of the decisions you make are a big product of where you are in life and a certain age, and the idea of just going off and doing something completely different. I'm 56 now, But the idea of doing that, when you think you're, I'm at my peak right now, or was it 40, was it 15 years ago? I don't know. But when at 40, it was like I had still a lot to do and a lot to learn, actually, even being on a public board. So that was a company listed on the stock exchange. They were turning over about 800 million a year, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a whole other world. And it's funny, you realise as an independent sort of business, you get exposed to these big industries and you think they know better. And corporate absolutely has got it all sorted, and you realise, how dysfunctional is this? It's like their idea of IP is slapping a sticker on something. It's like, that's not creative endeavours. And it's funny, they get so removed from the very substance of what they have created. So we're fortunate that the opportunity had presented, and this broader business, the second largest toy company in Australia and in New Zealand, and had offices here as well, amongst other exercises in apparel and what have you. And we were fortunate at that point that we were able to put together a group and to then privatise the business again. So now we're into sort of year 12 of it being privatised. And since the last 12 years, we sort of halved the business into its two natural businesses, which was what you guys have all just seen there on that presentation reel and what you probably mostly know us to be. And our anime group. And our anime group at that stage had like a Comic-Con like touring event where we would have 5 or 6 events a year with 100,000 kids turning out to it, and that Anime Lab, that streaming platform, and we probably had 35 people dedicated to just that category. And it's amazing now, 10, 12 years on, it's undeniable. It's one of the forces in modern entertainment. I think in the last 12 months, there's been 3 anime titles that have been number 1 at the box office across the planet. But we sold the business to a group called Aniplex in Japan, who's ultimately owned by Sony, and it was the right thing for that business at that point in time. And it was interesting, just to see it go. I remember talking to Aniplex at the time, going, so how are you going to fund this deal? Because that's one of the things you ask in any due diligence process. It's great having a deal, but how are you going to pay for it? And they said, we'll speak to Treasury. I said, what do you mean? Your Treasury. And I said, oh, right, you've got your own, you have your own bank. You are the bank. Yes, okay. So you realise on that end of the town, it's just the scale of these businesses.
Paul, you've had 30 years now to observe the genus independent producer. And I'm wondering what you've learned in those 30 years.
As in, are they human? What's the expression often used? It's like that farmer expression, we'll just fix it with number 8 wire or something like that. Like unbelievably gifted individuals who are problem solvers. The producers are the best producers we've worked with, the producers that really are ongoing in their careers and successful in their endeavours are incredibly collaborative and just ultimately fair, and seek simplicity, because it's you can put together a contract and you can have more and more pages in that contract and more deal terms and more holdbacks and exceptions and you name it, but it's the intent in which you enter any sort of arrangement, and so on every side. And the producers we've worked with have been most successful, have been the most collaborative, right? And it's been that just volunteering the stuff that they don't understand and vice versa, So yes, they're an amazing group, and I think we put so much time and effort into those producer relationships because they do so much of that heavy lifting to work out where, and spending time with the talent and trying to work out where the new opportunities are. So I don't know whether I'm actually answering your question here, but it's tough. My God, I can see it. We've had investment stakes in a couple of production companies, and one thing I would say is if the producers aren't sharing in the equity or participating in the actual companies themselves, there's too much sweat equity and all that other stuff that you can never build HR rules around, frankly, that you just have to be, they have to be stakeholders in whatever that enterprise is, I feel, or participating in it, whatever that project is. They have to have a really meaningful participation beyond some sort of set fee.
Could not agree more. I have one last question, which is, you're only 56. Are there any unfulfilled ambitions you have?
God, it is counselling. Having my own cinema on a seaside town and programming just the films I want to watch.
Fabulous.
But I reckon not. I mean that actually that sounds really great, but I could probably get bored out of my brain in some ways. But I think at this stage the key for, it's not even ambitions. I think the next stage is making sure we're employing people who've got the same interest and passion, who are representing the future audiences and the audiences that are turning out to engage with cinema and storytelling from wherever it is. So it can't be just from 56, and it's not by no means. We have a fantastic team that contribute and are part of all the decision-making process, but just ensuring that we continue to evolve and bring people in who are representing, the new face of, this part of the world and Oz.
Thank you, Paul. We are out of time, and I really don't want to get between you and lunch. So please join me in congratulating Paul on his first 30 years, and let's wish him another 30.
Thank you, David.